So in lesson 1.1, it's about the science and art of data. Statistics is just the science and art of collecting and analyzing and drawing conclusions from data, man. It's just like, here's a bunch of information. What does it mean? The statistical problem-solving process is just 4 basic steps. You just like ask some questions. You know, it's like, hey, how much screen time have I had today? Right? You ask some questions. You collect the data. So your phone did that for you. You know, it looks at it and it's like, look at this, you've been on your phone for 8 hours today. You analyze the data and you're like, wow, that was kind of a lot. I was only up for 10 hours and I've been on my phone for 8 of it, you know. And then you kind of interpret the results. Then all these parts of the data has different things, like the individual in a data set is like either a person or an animal or a thing that is described in the set of data, like a person, an animal, or a thing. Those are called the individuals. The variables are any value that, or any attribute that can take different values for different individuals, and we'll talk about that later. Like I said, this is just kind of getting all the vocab out of the way before we start using it. So, any attribute that can take a different value for different individuals. And here's the real meat and potatoes of today's lesson. It's all about categorical variables versus quantitative variables. We'll write it down, then we'll talk about it. A categorical variable takes values that are labels. It takes values that are labels, which place each individual into a different group called a category. So the quantitative variables, the word quantitative sounds like quantity, and does that mean like you're counting stuff up, you know, you're counting that up, so it takes on a number. Quantitative variables take on a number values that you like usually count things or numerical values. So that's the gist of today. One real big deal is what kind of variables do we have? Categorical variables or quantitative variables? And we'll do a little bit of practice problems here to kind of distinguish between those two. Thank you for telling me. So it takes on number values. So here we go. Here's a big old list. That's the hardest part about this class, in my opinion, is there's just a lot of words on the screen all the time. You know, it's like, holy cow, there is a lot of words. I know many of us do have a little trouble reading. That's so awesome. Let me help you. Do you know what I mean? Let me help you if we struggle with reading and stuff like that. But it gets easier once we start reading this. Here's just a bunch of data from all these movies. I don't in a recent year. If my memory serves me best, I think this is from like 2021. You know, I'm not quite sure. But they're pretty recent movies, you know, like Avengers, Spider-Man, Jurassic World, all this stuff. Maybe 2019, but whatever. Here's just a bunch of data from all these PG-13 movies, right? And here's all this stuff right here. They say identify the individuals and the variables in the data set. So let's do this. Let's write individuals. And individuals is, even though we have it defined up top, is just saying, what the heck is this chart about? You know, if this chart was presented to you, what is it about? How do you feel that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different movies in this? Are you cool with that? There's 5 different movies, right? So these individuals are about those. We'll be a little specific with it. It's the top 5 widest open PG-13 movies of all time. Let's just call it top 5 PG-13 movies, if you want to write that down to shorten it up. The individuals in this data set, what this was all about, was the top 5 PG-13 movies of all time. And, you know, the movie theaters are getting a little outdated thanks to Netflix and stuff like that, you know, but we do know what the movie theaters are. And a lot of these companies, when a movie gets released, like, that's a big day for them. It's like, hey, this movie just opened. How did it do at the box office? How much money did it bring in, right? So that's what this is all about. Those are the individuals. The variables are these guys right here. Boom, 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 right? So the variables, there are 4 of them. The theaters, the distributor, the opening weekend gross, and if you've never taken like a finance class or anything like that, gross means like how much money did you like bring in, you know, the gross. And then the genre. Are you cool with genre? Is like, is it a sci-fi movie? Is it a horror movie? Is it a comedy? That's kind of like what's going on in that. So the theaters, the distributor, the opening weekend gross, which I spelled wrong, and the genre. But moral of the story, sometimes since these are your notes, if you want to just point to those, you know, it's like, hey man, these are those guys. The like columns in the chart were what the variables were all about. And here's what they ask us to do. Like, define these as either categorical or quantitative. So let's make like a little chart right here. You don't have to write those down. Why don't we make like a little T-chart? You see how categorical is on the left and quantitative is on the right? Just kind of making a little chart. And here's the easy thing in my opinion. The quantitatives are about numbers, dude. The quantitative variables are about numbers. So if we look in this column right here, like how many theaters this opened in, did they put numbers? What do you think, yes or no? That is a quantitative variable right there. So we're going with theaters. So like Avengers Endgame, they're trying to say opening weekend, it was in 4,662 theaters across the United States of America. That, you know what I'm trying to say with like that. What about the distributor? What did they put in here? Numbers or not numbers? Those are not numbers. Aren't those different categories? Are you with me on that? Like, who released the movie? Oh, Disney released this movie. No, Sony did this. No, it was Universal. So this is the distributor. The distributor is a categorical variable, non-numbers. Opening weekend gross. What do you think about these? Are those numbers? That is a quantitative variable. So we'll just put the gross. How does that sound? Just to shorten it up a little bit. And then the genre, categorical or quantitative. What do you think about the genre? Categorical, baby. So genre. What a cool word. You feel pretty okay with like categorical versus quantitative. Quantitative is about numbers, sort of, right? There's a caveat to it. So if we go to the back side, there's a bonus tip. There's certain types of numerical data that just doesn't fit quantitative. Example, where do you live? 67601. Maybe you don't know. That's Hayes' zip code. Are you with me on that? Even though that is numbers, that is not like a quantity that's categorizing us to a region. What's my phone number? 785, and I'm not going to finish the rest, but doesn't 785 put you in a category if you are in western Kansas, right? If you have an area code of 785, and then many Hayes numbers start with 623, some of them 650, you know, like those are all, even though they're numbers, they're categorizing you to a region, right? So you got to be tricky. Social security number, right? Like, please don't tell anybody your social security number, but it's like if you listed it out, it's not like your 5,128,000. It's just a number. This is what they branded you when you were born. You know, this is your number, right? You know, so it's still a category. Cool? So just watch out for that. But I would say 99% of the numbers you see are quantitative variables. Cool? And then the distribution, it tells us what values of the variable take and how often it takes. How things are distributed. Tells us what values the variable takes and how often these take. And then the last thing where we needed our calculator for today is about like the frequency tables. Frequency means how often something happens, like how frequent does it happen. So a frequency table shows the number of individuals having each date value. Data value is what that's supposed to say. Sorry, not date. Data value. Shows the number of individuals having each data value. And then the relative frequency shows either the proportion or a percent. Blah. Thank you. This is one of our longest vocab days of the year on the first lesson. The relative frequency table. We'll do an example of those two things down below, and then we will call it a day. When it comes to lecture, we'll do some homework. Are you cool for me to move on, though? Okay, so here is something that does kind of suck, that they give us a bunch of data. Here's what I advise. I know a lot of students at Hayes High have a tough time reading, but it's nice to read through the basics right here, and they give us a cool thing. They tell me like a total number of things that are in this chart already. That's usually handy in a bunch of questions. Like there's 40 teachers in there. They said, what's your preferred movie genre from a sample of 40 teachers? So all of these are here. What they ask us to do is find the frequency of it. So I'll do action for you. Is that okay? I'm going to pick on action, and then here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times action showed up. Here's the beauty of doing that on paper. I could have either circled that or highlighted that, right? Your homework is on the computer. It is not that easy to find these and count these things. So this is why having a neighbor, someone you want to sit by, that can help you count some stuff up would be awesome. So how about we do this? Let's count up animation. First 3 people right here, animation. You're on that, okay? Last 2 people there, find all the comedies. Does that sound cool? And then Kamani and Hank, find all the documentaries. Dramas, next 2 people, you guys find dramas. Horrors, last 3 people right there, you're on horrors, okay? Rom-coms, you too, count up all the rom-coms. And then sci-fi, everybody else, right? Sound okay? Sci-fi, count those up, and then we'll compare numbers. How many animations did we get? 1. Woo! Big list. 1, I agree. Comedies. 5 is correct. Documentaries. 2 is correct. Dramas. 6. Horrors. 6. Rom-coms. 4. And sci-fis. Guess what they all add up to be? 40, right? You know, that's a way to double check yourself. That is called the frequency. Would you believe that's how many times those happened? Homework will also, you got to be careful, do they want the frequency or do they want the relative frequency? So how do you find that? The actions, there were 12 of them, right? You know, out of 40, so we have to punch that in our calculator. Sorry, I had my calculator open, but would you take 12 divided by 40 and get a decimal for that bad boy? What did you get? 0.30 is probably how they'll do it. On homework, you got to be careful. If they ask for the relative frequency, 0.30 is what they want. But sometimes they might ask, what's the percent? So we got to change that to a percent. Are you cool that that decimal moves 2 places and it's 30% of that list right there? So every one of these gets divided by 12, and I'll help you out. I think you get what's going on. How do you feel about this one? Did you get 0.025 when you got that one? All right, 0.025. So that's 2.5%. I just moved that decimal 2 places to the right and put a percent sign next to it. Comedy is 5 out. Sorry, I put 1 out of 12. I should have put 1 out of 40. I'm sorry about that. 1 out of 40. And then 5 out of 40. You just punch that in. And just to save us a little time since our first day, 0.125. 2 out of 40. 0.05. 6 out of 40. My question is, do you know where I'm getting these numbers from? You know, where the 6 out of 40 is. And then I know you know how to punch stuff in a calculator. And then another 6 out of 40 should be the same thing, right? So that's 0.15. I also don't have the best handwriting in the world, but writing on this computer makes it even worse. So if you can't read something, please holler. It's like, what does that say? You know, what does that say? And then another 4 out of 40, which is 0.10. I usually preview our homework before we do it, so I'm very confident that when they ask you for the relative frequency, you're going to put that decimal, but you might get a different question than somebody else, so if they ask you for a percent, you got to change that to a percent. Cool? Relative frequency versus frequency, categorical versus quantitative data. That's the moral of the story. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a good one.